Is time travel possible? We've had a lot of movies made about it. One movie that came out when I was a child, I was in elementary school, and I don't remember how old I was, but it was a movie that a guy in the post pre-World War I era went forward in time 800,000 years, and the Morlocks and the Eloi fought. There had been a nuclear war that had basically destroyed the planet, and it was really interesting. It fascinated me, and I grew up wondering about time travel. And it really spurred my interest in physics and later quantum physics. I pursued psychology, stat, and research academically because I didn't know if there'd be any money and kind of make a living doing the quantum physics thing. But it stayed my passion, it was my hobby, and I became fairly conversant in it. And I've had some life experiences that have addressed the question. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to connect a lot of dots because I think I understand what's coming. And to do that, I've got to pull together divergent experiences I've had along with theory, along with fact, and the Bible. And it all ties together, and we'll cover it right here on the Common Sense Show. My name is Dave Hodges. I'm the host. We're the show, freeing America one enslaved mind at a time. And we have a really interesting sponsor for you. And I have to tell you, right now, if you're looking at doing rare earth minerals and rare minerals and so forth, and they have military grade applications, this is your time to really make a lot of money. And you're thinking, well, what kind of money? I think it's unlimited. And I'm going to show you something. Tungsten has now come up, and I'm going to pull this up on my screen here so I can read it to you. But tungsten has come up, and we're looking at Vault Strategic Mining Company, and they are absolutely fantastic. And they are saying, well, we haven't mined tungsten since 2015, and we need it. Every weapon we have, every bullet, every rifle, every tank, every gun, every bomb has tungsten in it. And we haven't mined it since, and now we have a deficit. The Pentagon just spent $6.2 million on getting tungsten. There has been an executive order that has linked to we need to find more tungsten. And so Vault Strategic Mining Company is right there. They're a small guy playing in a big pond, but they're in the beginning. And they already have 10,000 feet drilled at Wheeler, which is known to be probably the best tungsten supply in the world. And you can get in for free. Want to watch a free video? Look at the opportunity? Well, here's what you do. You go to vault-presentation.com. That's VAULT, vault-presentation.com slash the Common Sense Show. Now, the Common Sense Show has dashes between each word. Okay, so again, that's vault-presentation.com slash the Common Sense Show. Great opportunity. Check it out. Won't cost anything and absolutely you won't be pestered. All right, I want to get into the time travel thing because I find this stuff just absolutely fascinating. And you notice I'm kind of doing this late at night. And I got to tell you, with all the, shall we say, my stuff is not being sent out to the 10% of my subscribers as it's supposed to. Um, our views have dropped off. And I talked to Scotty Sachs here recently, and I said, let's go do spaces on X. And I'd like to do kind of a rendition, but my own version and expand it to modern technology, a version of the old Art Bell show. And I was a big fan of Art and I had many friends in common. I covertly appeared on his show about the Phoenix Lights because it was involving where I was at and what people had told me with security clearances involved my teaching assignment. And I didn't want to lose my job. So when I was teaching stats and actually sociology at that time. Now, going forward with this is I've always been fascinated with the time travel aspect. Is time travel possible? Well, the most preeminent physicist in America, Michio Kaku, and you see him everywhere, articulate, funny, brilliant. He can make the complex very simple. I'd love to have had a class from him. I'm sure was just an awesome teacher. But he said, yeah, he said time travel conforms with the laws of quantum physics that we're finding out. Well, my experience with this happened serendipitously. Probably one of the top five remote viewers of all time, the late Ed Dames. Ed just passed not too long ago. But Ed was teaching remote viewing to select people. Now, I don't do this anymore because I'm not sure if it conflicts with my religious beliefs. And I've actually asked, pastors and so forth. And there's a real division of opinion. But I did do it for a while and I trained. And my mentor in this business, the late Bill Pollock, Bill was probably the smartest man I ever met. He was good friends with Art Bell and together and so forth and so on. They said, you had to take Dave Hodges. We kind of like him and you might enjoy having him in your class. And so I got to travel to California to be in Ed Dames, shall we say, secretive training at the time. Later on, he went commercial, but what he went commercial with was not the full meal deal. I can tell you that. It was good stuff and you could learn remote viewing, but not like we were taught. Well, anyway, Ed and I uh, were met in the class and we're talking, and his assistant and I became, very friendly. And so we're at lunch. The three of us are at lunch on the first day. And I asked Ed, I said, Ed, I look at the remote viewing stuff. Is it possible to do time travel? And he looks at me and he says, well, I know the answer to the question, Dave, but he said, it's classified. That answered my question right there. And his assistant was trying to hold back the laughter. And then I said, well, let me tell you what I've learned in my studies, that if you can create a rapidly oscillating field and tap into the right frequency, you can go to a corresponding time and space that matches that frequency. And I've been told it's all frequency based. And he looks at me and said, who the hell are you? That's quote unquote. He goes, you're talking classified stuff. I said, no. I said, this is open source. And he said, well, he said, I'm afraid if I start talking about this, I would end up behind bars. But we did have some off, shall we say, we had some covert talks about the theory that I brought up. And then when he found out who my father was, he goes, okay, I see where you get it from. He goes, I'm aware of what your dad was involved in, even though I didn't know your father. And so we actually talked about this at some length. Um, I did get out of Ed something that just came out in the last week. Physicists are saying they believe theoretically, and I've heard it's already been done, that messages can be sent back in time. And I got Ed to pretty much tell me this. I said, really? And he says, yeah, and we can remote view them to a point. And he says, we don't know why we lose the signal, but he said, eventually we do. So that's Michio Kaku. Now we've got new scientific findings saying they believe it's possible to send messages back through time. You got the Ed Dames component on this. Now, let me tell you what's going on, and I'm going to start making some tie-ins here that I think you're going to find very interesting. Feel free to criticize because now I'm going to go from the factual to theory. Actually, we're going to go in reverse order, the scientific method. CERN is doing time dilation experiments, and they've as much admitted to it. I mean, they'll use convoluted language and they'll talk around it, and won't come out and say it directly. But the things I've heard come out of CERN, it's quite clear they're doing time dilation experiments. And surrounding CERN are satanic, how do I say this? Satanic symbols, Moloch, Baal, Asherah, and yeah, for some reason they're fascinated with the symbols. The symbols of actually the Old Testament, as we know. Um, it's pretty interesting. Now, why would they do time dilation? We know it's possible. Well, let's go to Genesis 6, verse 4. And what we know there is it says that the angels rebelled in heaven, one third of them, and God cast them to the earth, much to our chagrin. We know they married earth women. So you would assume, yeah, and I'm not sure if it tied into the Noah's family line, but here's something in the Bible very interesting. Genesis 6, verse 4, at the very end, it was referring to the fallen angels, and they said, and they were there afterward. And you look at that and you say, after what? Well, the next scripture is about the flood. Were they there after the flood? Was there DNA there after the flood? I'm not sure which interpretation is the right one. I've actually talked about this in conferences, and it was really interesting because, excuse me, I been on Paul Begley's conference. He's done a couple of times to talk about this issue. I've done this with Hear the Watchman, um, and I've addressed this pretty strongly actually when I was at Branson in Steve Quayle's presentations. I talked about this, and at the time I was talking about it 6, 7, 8 years ago, it was fairly hypothetical and relatively new. And Paul Begley first heard me at Hear the Watchman. And Paul comes up to me afterwards, and Pastor Paul said, Dave, he says, this is the hot topic in eschatology. There's actually a piece on YouTube now that actually gets into this in quite detail. And I was stunned. I felt like, man, felt like these guys were in the room with me 7 years ago when I was talking about this. So I do believe that the DNA at minimum, maybe the beings, survived the flood. And we have the satanic influence today. And CERN is a representation of it. This planet is really Satan's planet, if you go by what the Bible tells us. You know, we should probably have a passport to be here because this ain't our home. We, the Christians, are the illegal aliens, to use the metaphor. Well, I have a theory. If you have satanic leaning organizations based on their symbology, and they're doing time dilation experiments, and they know that they're in trouble. They know tribulation's coming, okay, followed by judgment, the lake of fire. They won't be in the book of life, and they're going to be cast out. What if they could skip Judgment Day because they've manipulated time space? That's interesting, isn't it? That's actually my hypothesis. I think that's what's going on. And I think that they're looking to convert as many humans to transhumanism as possible because I'm seeing everywhere. I mean, I turned on, what was it, MSNBC online today, and it has all these pop-up articles. They have some pretty good stuff scientifically. Their politics, well, you know how that goes. But scientifically, they're pretty good. And they had something in there that I thought was really interesting. They said, scientists say singularity can be achieved within about 4 years. Whoa, that's 2030. And we keep hearing 2030, 2030, 2030. Possible. And are we going to be part of this group that will try to skip the Judgment Day, skip Armageddon? That's my hypothesis. I think it's very possible. I want to leave this too with a question unrelated to this scenario that I just proposed. If we can send messages back and you could find a way to send a message to your younger self, what would you say? I actually fantasized about that before I came on here and was doing this. I thought, what age should I go back? Now, I don't know about the grandfather paradox, like if you change history and your grandfather's not there, well, then you won't be there. Okay, so, you get the time paradox. But if you could send a message back to alter something about you, what would you do? What would you say? For me, I already know what it is. I'd say when I was 12 years old, I actually had a discussion with my science teacher about time travel. And I said, well, I saw that movie, The Time Machine, and I said, you had this oscillating field, and we had this really interesting discussion for pre-quantum physics to the public revelation. And I could go back and tell myself, you can do a career in quantum physics. Now, on the other hand, I've had some wonderful experiences. I love my teaching career. I love my coaching career. I worked as a therapist, mental health therapist. I love doing that. So I would have missed out perhaps on those things, but this is the one thing I really missed. And I just wonder what you would tell somebody. And then, of course, too, there's a couple of those relationships we should have listened to our friends or our parents and avoided like the plague. Would you send yourself a message then? Say, hey, I don't think you want to go there. I don't think that's a good idea. Tell me what you'd say. Look forward to seeing your comments on this. But I thought you might find this to be interesting. Um, we're going to see a whole lot more about this. And I'm going to tell you this too. If they do go through some kind of disclosure, first of all, I don't believe it's real. I believe it's fallen angel entities disguising themselves as aliens as part of the Great Deception. And I'm not going to break all that down here biblically, but that's my guiding light here on this. But the one thing that I would say is I do think we'll see some wonders, amazing demonstrations as the Bible talks about. And I think we'll see some time displacement. I think we'll see teleportation of humans. I'm just guessing, but I said, if we're going to have a deception, it's got to be pretty darn good, right? I think this is what we're looking at. And what we're looking at right now, too, is the build up to it. They're building a crescendo for the one day when an event happens. They can't deny it. Maybe it'll be like that movie with Michael Rennie, The Day the Earth Stood Still, early 1950s. And Michael Rennie plays an alien that lands on the White House Mall. I don't know. But what I do know is time travel is possible. And I have been told it's already happening. It's DARPA. We'll see. A little bit more on this. We live in an exciting age, if not a scary age, too. I'm Dave Hodges. This is The Common Sense Show.